Today is a really special day for us here at Guerrilla. We have all our composers here in Amsterdam.
Our composers come from everywhere around the world, so we don't have that many opportunities to sit together and actually do things face to face. So what we're doing, and this is the second time we're doing this for this project, is we're bringing everyone together. We are going to do a round table, looking back on what we did, also what we're going to do still, because we are at this point in time still in the middle of the project.
The first people on Horizon Zero Dawn were you two we started working together early on, didn't you?
You phoned me up.
Yeah.
I've got this crazy idea.
we did a session together and we got to know each other, and I found out that you were a percussion professional.
Yeah.
The thing is, at the beginning of the game, we knew so little about what we were going to do, but we did know that we would have tribes, and that's where you came in.
Yeah, I did you called me because I did a kind of a master in world percussion, and you wanted me to explore how the different tribes from Horizon Zero Dawn would sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you get Joris in?
We had the relationship with kill zones, so I worked on all the kill zones, and I remember that this new project was coming around, and he said, well, this might not be your thing because, you know, you've done the big orchestral stuff for Killzone, and this is quite, you know, we were kind of the opposite of what you've done there. So when I started sort of hearing about what it was about and trying to wrap my head around what that was going to sound like sonically, and I did see some of Niels's presentation and things, and thinking to myself, he's partially right, this isn't quite my bag, but it could be. It's really challenging, it's really interesting. What's so interesting about it is that juxtaposition of the mechanical and the nature.
But I think that's what you wanted, wasn't it? Or to get was the difference. Obviously, we write very different music than Joris does, and you wanted the two, not polar opposites, but you wanted two very different voices, didn't you?
You're all very good at finding that blend, but in your own way, and that's why it works so well together.
But that's what I liked about how this all worked as well, is the cross-pollination between what we're doing, because you find that what some person is doing sort of feeds into what you might be doing. And I remember that on the first game, was, you know, two things was like you guys sort of doing all sorts of weird things to instruments, like bowing and plucking them, and kind of thinking, make me sort of go around my studio thinking, what is there I can pick up and pluck and bow and hit and use in different ways that I haven't done before. And your work that you did with circle percussion as well.
Yeah.
Suddenly, you know, we were introduced to these massive drums that became such a big sonic
Became a big part of all
hallmark
of
Horizon, and sort of then ended up going into everything.
You know what I really liked is that from the first announced trailer onwards, that was a piece that was basically, you were all involved in that. That's what I like about it, because obviously you wrote the theme and you did most of the song, but you were in there with circle percussion.
Yeah.
And you guys were also
And I played guitar on it.
Yeah. But then you were just on board at that moment in time. That's already when everything started. And that was...
I remember having like a Skype call with you and one of the producers and just saying, well, we've got this trailer coming up. And so, all right, well, tell me the story. What's happening in this trailer? What's this about? And as you guys started talking, suddenly something happened, and I just had to say, oh, sorry, just a second. And
You literally walked out of the Skype
out of the Skype meeting. I just quickly ran upstairs and sort of, you know, put something down, and that was it. And it was so weird because that's the fastest, quickest thing I've ever done.
It's a good theme as well.
And it worked. And the same with Julie, and her involvement that was so random, because it was literally me calling up a mate and saying, I need a vocalist for this. And someone, you know, has got a certain character voice, and say, well, I'm just using someone at the moment. Why don't you have them do a demo? And I think it's even the demo that ended up on the track.
I remember one of the first things you said to us was you didn't want it to sound like anything else
Which is
that had been done before.
Just to say
And actually, no, and that was a fun challenge.
It was great.
Rather than an unfun challenge.
It is very difficult to do something you've never heard before.
Yeah.
With the instruments that we have. And so we came at it as, imagine if we lived in that world and we found this instrument, but we didn't know how you played it, what would you do? And you maybe wouldn't pick up a guitar and play it like a guitar if you'd never seen one before, you'd never seen the historical pictures of it. If you found a box full of harmonicas, what would you do with them? So we did the harmonica orchestra, double tracking harmonicas and bowing metal body guitars and just looking at things from a slightly
we just tried to just manipulate things in a way that we hadn't done before to make them sound different. You can play instruments without completely changing the sound, but you can play them in a different way.
Yeah. Can you give an example of that?
So we did this thing where we're using a guitar as a kind of more of a percussion instrument.
Yeah.
So we're keeping the lines very simple, but using setting up a rhythmic delay and using it as a percussion instrument rather than as a lead.
Yeah.
One of the key things as well was using a volume pedal to take off all the attack off a guitar and then playing chords, but then it sounds like a synth. You can still play the chords that a guitarist can play on a guitar, but you get this completely otherworldly kind of sound.
I think there was kind of an unwritten or maybe written rule, indeed, that if you were going to use strings, then you would have to kind of know for sure that it was the only thing that you could use to achieve the effect. If you could replace a string or layer it up with something else to make it not have that typical kind of like big orchestra Hollywood sound. Yeah. And I guess that's what you guys also did with that.
Yeah, and Joris was using, you were doing smaller sections of strings and recording stuff in interesting ways as well.
The concept of flutes came up, but there was quite a definite idea of like, oh no flutes because they're high and squeaky and we don't really like them. So it was about then looking at like the lowest flute I could find. So I found this guy that played a contrabass flute, which is like this amazing contraption of like pipe work that goes up and then into a triangle, and it sounds amazing. It's got such a deep voice. And it turns out that that was also a really good instrument to do like all these kind of cool breathy effects on. These big chiffs and stuff that you could put loads of reverb on and then it would just, go on forever. I had a really crappy little violin that actually had a crack in it, so when you bow it, it resonates.
You did the original Meridian City on the Mesa theme yourself on violin, didn't you? As a demo.
Yes.
We should still have that somewhere.
No, we always thought it sounded really good because it was really naively played and it was not the best violin. No, but I mean that in a I'm a big fan of naivety in music and
we played almost everything.
We play everything on it, and even if we can't, it's a part of our thing as well is learning to play an instrument over the duration of a project. So we'll go and pick something up that looks cool, and then we'll learn to play it, and we like the naivety of the sound of imperfection.
So by the time you get to the final cutscenes, we're really good.
But your Neil's percussion was such a huge part of it as well, on almost everything.
Especially having that an original palette of drums that were original for this game only, that you could call on, because it meant whatever rhythms and tempos and stuff you got into, it always had a sound of Horizon.
And it was a fun process as well to get to which drums would work in the game. My challenge in the beginning was more or less just making a new musical history. Just researching what kind of tribes are these and why are they making music, and then trying to lay that over our own history and seeing what instruments would work there. Turned out to be a unique sound that made it onto Horizon.
So then the game launched. We got a lot of people listening to our soundtrack.
It's fair to say that we were all pretty surprised by how the soundtrack went down. I mean, I think the game did even better than expected as well, right?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes.
And the same thing kind of happened with the soundtrack. I mean, I don't think any of us were really expecting it to get noticed as much as it did, which gave us all quite a different perspective on it moving forward, didn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And fun fact, we just found out that in 2017, the Horizon Zero Dawn soundtrack was the second most streamed game on Spotify.
So we finished up Horizon Zero Dawn, and then the Frozen Wilds was the next thing we worked on. And it's easy, I guess, to assume that it was just a continuation of what we did before, but actually that was a very pivotal project for music. Maybe you can...
I think it was kind of the keystone for realizing what we want to do for the Forbidden West. We actually did improve quite a lot of things in the Frozen Wilds. And one of those things was we have animated like full body mocap conversation scenes in there. And you can't really tell the difference anymore. In Zero Dawn, we had static camera set up for conversation. So it was just, you know, one character static in the picture and the other side, you know, just standing there back and forth, kind of like a setup. And in the Frozen Wilds, all of that was mocapped out.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we had like this issue, well, we planned for this amount of like cinematics, for example. And then you drop from this cinematic into a conversation that's seamless, right? We didn't have a plan for this.
Musically.
So, musically.
It's really interesting hearing you talk about it, actually, because you really do notice the difference.
Yeah.
And then we're now moving into the Forbidden West, and we're again you're pushing it even further. With the amount of music, because the game is much bigger.
Basically, we said, okay, we can update the way that music transitions and then the way that music functions a little bit, and we'll make it better. Or we kind of, our original idea goes off the table and we start over. And that's basically what we started looking into at that point in time. And at first, that's kind of like, oh, this is so much work. And you're like, oh, well, this is really cool. And then you get excited. And that influenced basically the music that you guys have been writing as well.
Yeah. I guess the other important thing is to mention here is that we didn't want to, we have a phrase in Britain where you say you didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We wanted to keep what was special about Horizon Zero Dawn music, but improve on the way it worked interactively.
Yeah. We figured out we're actually making a game with a grand story arc, right? Okay, we have this group of people. You know, each person in this group has sort of like a specialty, or let's say, you know, a bunch of specialties, and they complement each other quite nicely. But we also felt like, the part where we really need additional support is like the grand scenes, the storytelling, and actually that was the moment where we brought you into place as well.
Coming into it, I think what I realized right away was the way you spoke about the other composers that you hinted to, there was a respect there. And, you know, as much as musically, I wanted to make sure that what I did aligned with the vision of the world, it was almost as equally important to make sure that, you know, the vibe that I brought as a person would work. And that was a great challenge, because then it couldn't be 100% derivative, but it had to be something that could resonate really well with what you guys had already done. When I wrote what my thought would be for the next progression, I was just expanding on the world that you guys had created already. And then now we're in production, and it's like the writers essentially say, well, this is the world, and here's this other important character, and all of a sudden, it made complete sense. It was kind of a primer for me in the sense that I learned quickly, like, okay, no, these are the boundaries that I have melodically, I have to stay within, and harmonically, but also texturally. There's still a range of like, there needs to be a, whether it's musical naivety or a certain innocence, I guess, or rawness to it. And so for me, one other latch point was I made sure that even when I was recording the instruments, I made sure that you wanted this dry, intimate sound.
Yeah.
But when I would listen to this stuff, I was like, yeah, there's that, but there's this wide expanse, you know, which matched the landscape.
That must have been quite difficult, right?
You would think it would be, but it actually was in some ways liberating. Like the more limits placed, working within the parameters of like your guys' sound that you already developed. You talked about cross-pollination. It's cool to be able to take, I mean, not in the sense that you want to completely take over somebody's palette. None of us want to do that, but just being able to just grab one layer that's similar and kind of sift it in to the musical dough that we're creating.
I mean, that's an interesting picture. I think it's just adding a new facet to our library of sounds and also styles, right? So stylistically, I think the interesting part about adding you to the project was you bring in something fresh. You have your own, like, you know, history of, you know, writing music for different types of genres and all that kind of stuff. But it also just made total sense because it felt so natural. It really fits in. So we have this kind of, you know, we have this vision about this project, what we want to do, and this chunk is missing. And it was just like a perfect slot in there.
That's the interesting thing, isn't it? Is how does that lead into the sound for Forbidden West? In that, what's the difference between the approach to, you know, Horizon Zero Dawn and Forbidden West? In that there's sort of an evolution there.
Was it what was the basis of it? We were doing an arc.
No,
we had
Lucas,
this kickoff.
you took the three main new story arcs that weren't in the first one, and you gave one to each of us, didn't you?
Yeah.
And we
wrote a suite for all of their situations.
which in our kind of suite process is maybe a piece, quite a long piece of music, where we try and explore what it might sound like in all the different ways you might write music for this person. So we to make it really basic, we always imagine we'd try and think up a theme for that character or arc. We'd try and put it in a more of an ambient exploration setting, and then we'd also, because it's Horizon and this is a big part of it, we'd also try and get a little flavour of what they might be like in combat, so that when we then later on in the project come back to that story arc, whether it be a cutscene or a big piece of combat music or a zone, we have a starting point.
Yeah.
You were doing Aloy's journey again, but Aloy had changed a lot.
Yeah, and that was an interesting concept, wasn't it? Is to sort of have the original theme or have the original character, but knowing that she's going to have a very different journey. And that was a sort of a big part for me, is knowing part of the story, in that things are not all great. Is perhaps the way I can say it. Is that, you know, there's been this, you know, at the end of Horizon Zero Dawn, there's been this sort of catharsis of like, I've resolved something, but there's actually realization that that doesn't mean that everything in the world is resolved. And so there's almost an element of sadness or an element of impending doom or impending danger that was really interesting to weave into that theme.
We also felt the world is like one big aspect of it, but actually Aloy's journey through that's the key thing that we really need to focus on this time around.
Basically, maybe it might be nice to kind of talk about what actually we are doing differently this time around. A lot of stuff that we changed based on our observations in Frozen Wilds in the first game. I think the biggest thing which we will talk about is emotion and the way that works in our game. The first game was based around locations and tribes and stuff like that. And since we have a more emotion-based system now, we were losing that. So we looked to you, Niels. And we asked you, would you be interested in doing that? Because you did a lot of tribe research before.
Yeah, well, that was a fun assignment, to say the least. As with Horizon Zero Dawn, it was looking at what these tribes would sound like, determining what the sound palette was for example, the Oseram, what kind of people they were, really digging into all the research you made, the lore. It was a search, to be honest.
This isn't the music that they play, this is scoring for their area
Yeah.
and their location.
So I did, it started with the Oseram, and after that the Utaru, I believe.
Yeah.
That was a completely different research than the Tanakh, which are much more gritty than the Utaru, and they sound like that. And for all the tracks, I used new instruments that I didn't own previously. And for the Tanakh especially, Lucas just kept nudging me, said, make an instrument, a plank with all the strings, and then, you know, and in the end I did, and it worked.
Of course. It did.
Okay, so in 5 words, what do the Osram sound like?
Blunt, big hits.
That's 2 words.
Non-melodic.
Okay, that's enough. That's 5. Utaru.
Lyrical, harmonious. The Tanakh, gritty, aggressive, like gritty guitar string, dirty strings.
Now, the big thing that we changed is that actually all the music you hear continuously, we can nudge that in a certain emotional direction.
So basically, you have a circle. It's like a pizza, using the pizza analogy again. A pizza has a bunch of slices. Each slice represents a different emotion that Aloy is going to experience throughout her journey during this whole arc. Each slice of the pie represents an emotion that Aloy is going to go through. And at any given point, essentially, you can go from this emotion and transition through like a transition piece into another emotion. And the idea is essentially throughout the course of the game, you are essentially, you know, dynamically, based on what happens in the game, you're basically going from one emotion to another. And we are essentially like the emotional friend, you know, that supports you on your journey as you play as Aloy going through the game.
We have 3 different states.
Yeah.
Aloy is exploring and doing stuff, not really engaging in anything. Then we got the engaged state, which means he is doing something related to an activity, but not fighting. And then we got the vigorous state, which is fighting stuff.
Yeah.
And so when you got your emotion calm and you got your state vigorous, and I think you had
got
that
that
one on
one,
your
yeah.
plate.
Calm fighting, yeah. Right.
Yeah. So obviously not everything works one-on-one, but it does give us the possibility to kind of have a whole pool of music for anything you want to do within that one emotion that will go well together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it vertically, basically, it passes through. You can go from, you know, calm, vigorous, back to calm, idle. And essentially the idea was that we could jump at any point from state within or jump to another emotion as well. The thing that I found interesting wasn't so much the different emotions as much as the role that emotion played. So like the difference going from idle to engaged when you're doing something kind of grandiose and you're feeling like you're on top of the world, figuratively or literally. I thought that was really interesting because that is a great way to hook in and connect the player with the character. Like as a player, there's nothing better than that feeling of like, I'm empowered, not just with a power up or something, but I'm actually empowered emotionally.
There's a second layer to this, which we spoke about when you first unveiled the Nexus to us all, which was actually, it's getting us to write in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's actually a really powerful thing, especially on a sequel, where she's still in the same world, it's still the same lead character, you've still got the same people writing the music apart from Alexa. That's one of the solutions to keeping it fresh.
Yeah.
Basically, we're looking at the world through the eyes of Aloy. Like, that's really our paradigm. It's like really...
It's not even her eyes, it's looking at it, internally, what her story arc,
Exactly.
internally, what she is.
Yeah.
And you were doing a lot telling us, no, but it's her on her own, and this is what she's feeling here.
Now you have all that music material that is, you know, categorized in all those different types of emotions, and you know, throughout like a game production, like, you know, an open world game, there's so many occasions where you can create something special if you have the fitting content.
We have a whole new music tool being written for us internally. we can have all those variations actually in the same track, where we needed to bounce them out separately before, and you would hear that we would go to a new track. Right now we can start a track in a really full arrangement, and it gets close to midnight, for instance, and suddenly we kind of play a very bare version, or only the melody. We got all these kind of transitional things that we never had before. I'm really excited about that.
But there's also something about the story, though. I mean, I don't know if you guys feel this, but for me, it definitely feels that things have sort of shifted to slightly darker and slightly more intense and more aggressive palette.
There are some darker things that are going to happen in this one, and
She's been through a lot already.
Yeah.
Quite.
Yeah,
exciting.
and just just fleshing out those longer arcs, and that's really our mission. We want to tell stories.
Yeah.
We want to take the player on a journey, on an emotional journey through the eyes of Aloy.
You know what I remember from Horizon Zero Dawn was that I think Epilogue was one of the last cutscenes that we did, and it's basically the one where the player lets go of Aloy.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing that scene with Joris's music.
Yeah, it's a bit
It was like,
tear-jerky.
oh, it's done.
Yeah.
You know, and it was almost like physically I had to say
Yeah.
goodbye to, it sounds so weird, but I had to say goodbye to Aloy for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember that moment, and I am in a way looking forward to that moment, but also not really.
Yeah.
Because you've been, each project is like going through a journey.
Yeah.
But there's also the excitement, isn't there, of because you don't know what people are going to sort of attach themselves to. Because you put things in there and you hope that they're going to like the bits that you like, but at the same time you can't predict what people are really going to, really sort of appreciate.
It's a
And that's
fascinating
part of
process.
the excitement.
Yeah.
And it's again that process, isn't it, of seeing people, seeing YouTube videos of people playing it and discovering things and going on that journey that you've already been down on a couple of times, but people are sort of discovering for the first time. There's something really, really quite magical about that.
I'm looking forward to that point where we've done everything, and there's that moment that I know at least all the projects that I work on, there's a certain point where I get goosebumps. There's the goosebumps at the start of the project where you're excited, but you're also nervous. But then there's the goosebumps at the end when you realize something special.
Yeah.
And this has all the DNA to be something really special.
PlayStation